he used a gun, so yeah, sure, there's gunpowder on his hands, but that doesn't prove he was there. Or he might have used a firing range. It's an interesting sport people have. They use guns at firing ranges, and yes, they have gunpowder on their hands. What if he just borrowed the gun that had gunpowder all over it? Or, a lot of people are curious in what a gun feels like, even though they never handle it. Or you shook hands with somebody. It can happen. And the gunpowder gets transferred to him. Police cars also. Again, people who fired guns, they have gunpowder on them. They get into the police car, they wipe it on the seats, and this innocent guy might have just wiped his hand on the seat. So when they bring him into whatever it is, to the police station to test his hands for gunpowder, you're going to find gunpowder, but the guy didn't do anything. What you have to do, by the way, is when you have a suspect and you throw him in the police car, make sure you bag his hands. Put plastic bags around his hands and close those hands. Close the bags, usually with a twist with a tie. Then you throw him in the car, and you have to do the test as soon as possible. The longer you wait, the more likely it's gonna fall off. By the way, lawyers now, at least they should know, and ask the question: did you bag him? Whenever there's somebody who they say, hey, we found gunpowder in his hands, he's guilty. The lawyers are supposed to say, did you bag him? Meaning, when you put him in the police car, did you put bags around his hands? If they cannot answer that, then the lawyers can throw out the evidence. So be aware of that. So the question is, okay, so how are these tests done? How do you find this lead, barium, and antimony? So lead, by the way, is using less in bullets because lead is bad for the environment. It's bad for people. It's not a good thing. We generally try to avoid lead. Because especially when people grow up, like children, they grow up, they ingest lead. It's bad for their brain. Their mental activity is stunted. So we really try to avoid lead. Even though back in the day, especially the Greeks, they had lead. Their land they could mine a lot of lead, and they used lead all over their buildings. They used doweling, which used lead also. They melted lead, and they fused things by melting lead. They used a lot of it. But pipes used to be lead all the time, which is terrible because the lead will leach out of the pipes and get into the drinking water. But now we know lead is harmful, and we try to avoid it. That's why it's really not found in our environment. So to test for this thing, we take tape, and we put tape on their hands and remove the tape, and then we analyze the tape. The adhesive tape, the Scotch tape, and if there's gunpowder on it, okay, that tells us a lot, because the gunpowder residue will transfer to the tape. Or this is done a little bit more often. We take 5%. This is nitric acid. It's dilute, so it doesn't really hurt anybody. We swab the front and the back of each hand, and we analyze these swabs. We also test the non-firing hand, because we want to compare it to what does not have gunpowder. So if both hands have gunpowder, maybe the guy just handled gunpowder with both hands. So we want to really know. These 4 swabs are the front and back of each hand, even the non-firing hand. If he's a righty, we do the left hand also. The back of the hand is the control, especially non-firing hand, because we would assume that gunpowder didn't get there. If the controls have gunpowder, then probably this guy just handled gunpowder, so you can't prove anything here. We also try to get the inside of the cartridge case if we find it, because that would have gunpowder, and if possible, maybe it's possible to link specific parts, of that came from the inside of the cartridge to what was found in his hands. In that case, we can certainly connect it very well. But usually, it's just the gunpowder. So, the truth is, gunpowder can be found elsewhere, like at a firing range. So, but we do test for gunpowder. Usually a person has absolutely nothing to do with firing a gun. Like a lot of people just live in the city all their lives. They never handle a gun. Not in a firing range. They don't go hunting. So people like this, if they have gunpowder on their hands, well, yeah, that is certainly an indication that they were there and they firing the gun at the crime scene. Okay, there are problems with this, though. Little limitations that it's not magic. You wash your hands well, you'll get rid of it. You might rub your hand, it can come off. Even 2 hours afterwards, it might flake off or get brushed off. After 6 hours, it's pretty much a negative result will be useless. If you still find after 6 hours, again, that shows something, but a negative result does not prove anything. Also, for 22 caliber bullets, they might again they try to avoid having antimony and lead in there. Even barium, they try to avoid having it in there. I mean, usually you find some, but even they're trying to make these bullets where they don't have any of this residue. So not finding the residue does not mean he did not fire a 22 caliber bullet. Okay, so suppose you suspect you have it, and you want to find it's like only a trace amount. So your chemical test we said earlier might not have shown anything up. So if you only have trace amounts, like a particle here and a particle there in the cloth, you can use a scanning electron microscope. If you can identify the tiny crumb or whatever it might be, not a crumb, tiny spot that has the gunpowder, then you can put it through a scanning electron microscope and you can actually identify what it looks like and find out whether it's gunpowder by using the scanning electron microscope. However, remember, scanning electron microscope magnifies things, let's say 100,000 times. You're going to have to do a lot of searching to find this tiny powder grain of gunpowder residue. So if you do, again, it's not. If you do find it, that's great. But it can be very hard to find a place where you can actually find this gunpowder grain, so that to magnify it to test whether it really is gunpowder grain. Gunshot residue particles, they're easily distinguished under the microscope, so you can tell. The other thing you can do is, remember, the scanning electron microscope, you send X-rays out. You send an electron beam onto the sample, and this will emit X-rays. These X-rays they're unique for every element, so if there's barium in there, you can tell, antimony or lead. So naturally, by using this scanning electron microscope, you're going to hit it with an electron beam. You're going to get X-rays emitted. These X-rays, you can test them. You can see, are these X-rays of barium, antimony, or lead? If they are, then we know that this thing was gunshot residue. So it's slow. This is slow going because you got to find the little tiny grain. So because of that, it's slow going to find gunpowder residue where it's only trace amounts and you're not sure if it's there at all. So automation might enable you to speed it up, like by scanning it back and forth. But at this point, it's very slow being able to use a scanning electron microscope to identify and prove the existence of gunpowder residue. There's something else you can get from guns. Let's say you recover a gun. They have a serial number, so you can find out from the gun who bought it, or something about the manufacturer of it. Perpetrators, they know this, so they often file it down. So either before they use it or before they throw it away, so that it can't be traced to them. So if they file it down, then no one. You look there, you look at it for the serial number, you'll see a lot of scratch marks. You won't see anything. So what do? Anything has a serial number, like a car engine has a serial number. Again, if they file it away or they scratch it away, how do you use it? You still can, because serial numbers are usually stamped on by like a hard metal press, and when it's done, leaving